Notice they're not pseudonymous. There's a difference between pseudonymous writings, easy for me to say, and anonymous. Anonymous means we don't know who wrote it. It's published without an author's name being listed. Pseudonymous means it's published with a false name, a false author attributed. The four Gospels are not pseudonymous because the earliest manuscripts of these Gospels, we believe, did not contain the titles Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke, Gospel of John. They just published the text as it was. At least if it ever did have an author's name attached to it, we don't have any evidence in the manuscript history, nor do we have any evidence in any other historical place. What happened was these names got attached to these documents. And that's eventually how they got included into the canon. People thought that these documents eventually were written by the people whose names that they possess, and therefore they thought they had some kind of connection to the apostles. Notice what the canon list eventually being have. This is on your handout also. Look at the Muratorian canon. Remember, the word canon just means list. So this was a list of books that some author believed were Scripture and should be read by Christians and churches, and he mentions others that he believes they should not. Sometimes he didn't believe they were bad books. Sometimes he believed they just weren't supposed to be included with the highest canonical books. There's a big debate about whether this canon list was composed around the year 200 or around the year 400. The scholars tend to line up one side or the other. It used to be, when I was in grad school, that most people said, oh, it was written around the year 200. Now I understand that probably the majority of scholars would say, no, it comes from a later period. That's not really all important for us, because what's important for us is to see, at this point, either 200 or 400, what was included and what was not. This canon list includes these books that aren't in our Bible. The Wisdom of Solomon, which is actually in the Apocrypha, and I'll talk about that, and the Apocalypse of Peter. We do have an Apocalypse of Peter, along with the Apocalypse of John. It's just not in our Bible. It's considered New Testament apocryphal writings. Also, this writer excluded these books that are in our Bible. The letter to the Hebrews, one letter of John. He rejects the Shepherd of Hermas, which is a book that we include in a groupings of writing we call the Apostolic Fathers. It was written in the 2nd century sometime by a guy in Rome named Hermas, and it's called The Shepherd. And he excludes other books he calls Gnostic books. We'll talk later in the semester about what does Gnostic mean at this time. So notice that this could be a very early canon list, and it doesn't match our list. It does have the four Gospels, though. Then the first time you get a list by any Christian that we still possess, that's extant, that survives, that has the 27 books of the New Testament that is in our Bible, is in the year 367. It's the Easter letter by the Bishop Athanasius, who was Bishop of Alexandria. Bishops at this time, especially of major cities, would sometimes send around what we call a Paschal letter, an Easter letter, in which they get instructions or different kinds of things to their churches. And in one year, when he's doing this, he says, these are the books that you should read and should not read. And this is the first time that the precise 27 books that he lists are the 27 books that we list. It's interesting, though, he does list the letters of Paul last, behind the other letters, rather than before them, as we have in our list. And then we don't really start getting any kind of consistency with this until into the 3rd and 4th and 5th and 6th centuries. So what I'm saying now is it took a long time for this to solidify. And one of the things we think made it solidify was the development of codices, a codex. What is a codex? Early books were all scrolls. So you might have a book, if you had a book as long as the Gospel of Matthew, it'd take up a pretty thick scroll. Now, what happens if you want to read not the whole book of Matthew, but you just want to read Matthew 13:13? Well, you have to unroll your scroll. You have to find the place, then roll it all back up. And what happens if you want to move back and forth between a bunch of different letters? Well, you have to unroll different scrolls. Scrolls in synagogues, they didn't have books like this. They just had a basket or a box or a place called a geniza, and they just had scrolls all in it. So if you wanted to read Isaiah, it actually was more than one scroll. So you'd have to take that scroll out and undo it. Now, what some scholars may have speculated, we don't know this for sure, sometime around this period of time when early Christianity, somebody got the big idea, hey, let's cut up the scroll into pages and sew the pages together and then put it all in a book. And that way you can flip around in it a lot easier. Some scholars have even speculated that Christians may be the first to do this because they were arguing with their friends the Jews, or their enemies the Jews in some cases. And if you want to prove that Jesus really was born of a virgin, well, you need to go to that passage in Isaiah where at least the Greek version, it's not in the Hebrew, but the Greek version of the Jewish scripture said that a woman would be born, this man would be born of a virgin. That's the prophecy that we read around Christmas time. A virgin will bear a son. But you might have to also refer to a psalm over here or to another passage over here. And it's too difficult if you're unraveling scrolls and everything. So some people believe that Christians, precisely because they wanted to proof text a lot, they wanted to run around through a lot of different texts, they actually invented the codex. I'm not talking about tampons. Codex with an E, okay? All that means is this is a codex. It just means pages sewn together and placed within the covers of a book. So what we call, when you see the word book in ancient Greek or Latin, they didn't think of this. They thought of scrolls. So when you see a word book, the mechanical thing they're actually talking about is a scroll. This was an interesting new invention of a new piece of technology. Maybe not quite as revolutionary as the computer, but close. Because all of a sudden, cumbersome scrolls, what would be contained in the codices we have, the plural of this is either codexes sometimes, or if you want to act like you actually know Greek, Latin, you'd use the old Latinized plural, codices. You'll see both of those written in different sources. A codex of the Bible would be pretty big, maybe that thick and that wide. The ones we have, they're stored in the Vatican Museum. We have a few of them that survive from this period. They're pretty impressive looking, but they would be big, but still, that would be a lot easier to transport and handle than a whole box or closet full of scrolls. So this was a very innovative piece of technology. But one problem that this also caused is if you're going to put all the books, the documents that you think are Scripture, between two covers and not just have a bunch of scrolls lying in a box or a closet, with the scrolls you can take one out and put another in. If you decide that you think Daniel is not Scripture or you think the Revelation of John is not Scripture, just take it out of the box. Put it somewhere else in the synagogue or the church. But once you start publishing things in between covers, you actually have to decide what goes in and what goes out. And so around this time, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th century, we get different codices, different codexes, that is, books, and we can tell then what sorts of books they included in their scripture. And notice on your handout just some examples of this. The canon of Mommsen, early 4th century canon, includes Matthew, Mark, John, and Luke in that order. So it has our 4 and only our 4, but in a different order. It excludes the letter to the Hebrews, the letter of James, the letter of Jude. And it argues, this is one interesting thing about it, it argues that the books must be exactly 24 because Revelation 4:10 has 24 elders in God's throne room. Convincing argument, right? Codex Sinaiticus, which is around the year 350, we think. This is one of the earliest codices of the Bible we have. It includes the letter of Barnabas, which we don't have in our Bibles, but we do possess it, and the Shepherd of Hermas, which I already talked about, which was written somewhere around the year 100 in Rome, or right after that. It also excludes Jude. So it has 2 books that we don't include, and excludes one that we do include. Codex Claromontanus from the 6th century, so in the 500s, includes Matthew, John, Mark, and Luke. Again, it has all 4, but in a different order. It has the letter of Barnabas, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Acts of Paul, along with the Acts of the Apostles, and the Revelation of Peter. So it has that revelation of Peter again. It excludes Paul's letter to the Philippians, which is in our Bible, Hebrews, and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now notice, that means that some people would say that they use that 367 date when Bishop Athanasius sent around his Easter letter, and they say that's when the Christian canon of the New Testament was set, because it's the earliest list we have. But that's not really right. He was just bishop of one city, one area. His letter was not binding on anybody else except the churches in his Alexandrian diocese. So it didn't set the canon. 367 is simply the time when we get the earliest list that matches our list of 27 books in the New Testament. But you can see when you look at all these different codices, different canon lists, from a century later in the 400s, 2 centuries later in the 500s, 3 centuries later in the 600s, you still get different lists.